גפר עלינו חסדו, ואמת אדוני לעולם, הללויה, הללויה.
Shalom and shalom to all the women online. I hope you have been blessed by the Lord through these studies, which come from the teachings of Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum and Messianic leader Jacques Gabizon here in Montreal. Today we're going to see King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in the book of Daniel, chapter 2. You can turn there if you're not there already, because I will not be reading all of the verses. And we'll see what the Lord tells Daniel that it means. It's part of how I present the true Christian faith to unbelievers, because there is simply no other holy book on the planet or throughout history that has ever accurately predicted the rise and fall of empires long before they existed. You just can't put any so-called religion or lack of belief, or you can put any religion or lack of belief, people who say there is no God or the Bible's not true, you can test it this way. You can tell them about Daniel, tell them about the statue in chapter 2 that we're going to look at, and then there will be more when we get to the different beasts in Daniel 7. So remember that we started chapter 2 last time with a quick outline, and we're going to try and finish as much as we can in chapter 2 at this point. The chapter is the longest in Daniel, and the first 30 verses of this chapter start with Nebuchadnezzar's demand, and we almost finished it last time. He challenges the wise men in verses 1 to 13. Daniel makes a request in 14, 15, and 16, and he prays as the first, uh, example of a prayer meeting in verses 17 to 23. And that was where we ended last time. So tonight we will see the testimony by Daniel in verses 24 to 30, and the dream, verses 31 to 35, and then interpretation, verses 36 to 45, and then we'll see if we can get to the reward for Daniel and his friends for the last 4 verses of the chapter. So we start with Daniel's testimony. He's got to stop Arioch, the chief executioner, and says, "Don't destroy the wise men of Babylon," because that's what the king had decreed. And so perhaps the killing had not yet begun, with prepositions we don't truly know. But he says, "Take me before the king, and I will declare that interpretation." And and Arioch brings Daniel in haste, and maybe he didn't want to kill all those people because the school of astrology in Babylon was world renowned, and so he says, "I have found a man um, of the children of the captivity of Judah. I found a Jew, and he's going to make known that interpretation to the king." And he believed Daniel. Obviously, he didn't say, "How do you know?" It's interesting. But maybe he was happy he didn't have to kill all those people. We don't know. But look, Arioch is a bit like Ashpenaz, who we saw in chapter 1. God notices people who respond to the Spirit's leading, because Arioch didn't say, "Wait a minute, how do I know, you can do anything?" But remember, God is not unjust to forget the work and labor of love of people around us. That's Hebrews 6:10. And so Nebuchadnezzar asked, verse 26, "Can you make known the dream and the interpretation?" And so what does he say, Daniel? He says, "Nobody can do this," which is exactly what his wise men had told him. But he goes on and says, "Only the God in heaven can do this." He's witnessing to the king. He's the one who can reveal the secrets. And he already uses the past tense. He has made known to the king through that dream. You don't know what it means yet, but I'm going to tell you what's to come in the latter days. Now, latter days, if you have heard much of Dr. Fruchtenbaum's teaching, you'll know that it's a term that he talks about. It's a prophetic term. It's used many times in the Hebrew scriptures, and I prefer to call it that than the Old Testament. for different time periods. And there, I could have given 7 different time periods maybe, but one of them, for instance, is before Moses dies. In Deuteronomy 31, he says, tribulation or evil will befall you in the latter days. So he talks about the tribulation that's coming. And then let's look at Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. This is when it's talking about the kingdom. It says, it will come about in the latter days, the mountain of the Lord will be established as the chief of mountains and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And this is the Messianic kingdom. And so those are just 2 times when in the latter days is used as to describe a time period. So Nebuchadnezzar had been thinking about the future, and Daniel, through God, tells him, "It was on your mind when you were in bed. God knows what you're thinking." You think of the Santa Claus song. He knows when you are sleeping. He knows when you're awake. Well, God knows it all, and He wants to tell you what's ahead. Why did God want Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan king, to know what was ahead? Don't know. Um, but God, the revealer of secrets, is giving you this information. Um, and it's not because I'm so smart, Daniel says, or I'm wiser, but so that you might know, verse 30, the thoughts of your heart or the thoughts of your mind. Wow. What a God. So Daniel says, no, 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 it's not me. It's God. And that reminds us of John the Baptist when he said, he must increase, I must decrease. So that's John 3:30. It's the same kind of humility that we are supposed to have. And wouldn't it have been so tempting to say, yeah, look how much I know and look what I can do and I'm better than all those magi. And no, he says, I don't have more wisdom. He takes second place, even behind the Magi, so that God takes the first place. And that's great. So let's look at the dream in verses 31 to 36. And the appearance in verse 31 says it was mighty, it was awesome. And that reflected light, it says its brightness was excellent. That's what it means. It was shiny, shiny, shiny. And Daniel says it stood before you, so it was standing up. It was erect, and the aspect was terrible. So let's look at first the composition. What was it made of? So I have a slide for you. If you look at verses 32 and 33, the composition is that the head was fine gold. The breast and the arms were, or the chest and the arms were silver. The legs were iron, starting at the upper thighs. That's why the line is there. And the feet were part iron. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see he has, it looks like variegated feet. Well, that's it. They're part iron and part clay. So I want you to think about just a couple of observations at the start. Um, Obviously, gold is worth more than iron, right? So there's a decrease in the worth of the metals. There's a decrease in position. Obviously, your head is vital and your feet may not be. And then a decrease, now here's a scientific term for you, in specific gravity. The image is top heavy. The gold is so much heavier. Gold is 2.5 times heavier than iron. Looks like it could fall, actually. Um, and then in verse 39, there's a statement of fact. And Daniel just says, well, after you, there's going to be another kingdom. That's all. Now, he doesn't say there's going to be another king. Did you notice? So the type of authority that's going to run this area is not going to be a one-man show like Nebuchadnezzar, who was one king. There's going to be a kingdom after him because Babylon had an absolute monarchy, one guy, one king does it all. And then there was going to be Medo-Persia. And you've got 2 countries, the Medes and the Persians, working together. And the monarch, the guy in charge, is not above the law. In fact, he can't even break the laws of that country. He can't even break his own decrees. Then is going to come Greece, and I'll show you the statue again in a moment. But with Greece, they just conquered they conquered land. So their force of conquest gave them the right to rule it. but there was no dynasty, there was no royal right, and certainly when it broke up, it was a mess. And after that, there was the imperialism of Rome, and again, an empire. I don't know if any of you have been to Italy, but I went to Europe one time. I went last year. And when you go to Rome and they say, this is the empire, I thought, well, that's sort of, arrogant. And then you look around and you go, yeah, this does look like an empire. Um, and because it did start out as a republic, meaning there were many different groups, but it kind of degenerated into mob rule. And so we talked about the decreases. Let's talk about the increases because there's an increase in hardness. If anybody of you has had something made of gold and you hit it hard, it might have bent because gold is softer than iron, right? And iron is much stronger than gold. And so it is the fulfillment of that increase of strength is showing that, like Greece was stronger than Babylon. So let's go on with the stone that comes, and that's we're going to develop that probably next time. That smiting stone, as Dr. Fruchtenbaum says, verse 34 and 35, it's cut without hands, which means it's divine. Um, and that smashing couldn't have come at the beginning because it's going all the way down to the toes. So we had to describe all those empires, and then something would come afterwards. And what does that stone do? Well, to that image, it breaks the whole thing up and it becomes like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. It's like dust, the wind carries the dust away. There was a man, Leopold, who said the sweeping away was so complete that even the dust couldn't find a visible resting place. So, when we clean house, dust does find a resting place if we're not careful. So that's the results on the image. The results of the stone is the stone becomes a great mountain, and that mountain fills the whole earth. So let's look at the interpretation in verses 36 to 45. First, Daniel starts out by saying, this is it. That was your dream, right? And if I told you the right thing, then you can trust what I'm going to tell you now the meaning is. And he says, not I will tell you the interpretation, we will. So he included his three friends. He didn't forget their role in everything. They were in on the prayer, that's for sure. And he says, okay, the first empire is you, Babylon, verses 37 and 38. Nebuchadnezzar, you are the king of kings. You and your kingdom are the head of gold. And what did God give Nebuchadnezzar? Wow, sovereignty of that first empire and the power, the capacity to rule that kingdom, and his strength. He had to cope with problems. I mean, any leader has to. And glory, honor was given to him. And how much of the world could he rule? Well, wherever men dwell. So he could have taken over the planet if he wanted to, the whole inhabited earth, and where animals live. So obviously not the oceans, but every place else. God gave him that greatest authority over the whole planet. Nobody else had ever been given that before, and he had been given universal reign. He didn't take it all. That's beside the point. But he could have kept conquering until he got every part of the world. God granted him guaranteed success. So he was the head of gold. There are a couple places in two other prophets. You can look this up on your own later. I will not be putting them up on the screen, but there are two other places that speak about Nebuchadnezzar and his reign. You can look up Jeremiah 27, verses 5 to 8, Jeremiah 27, verses 5, 6, 7, and 8, and you can see Nebuchadnezzar in Ezekiel, Ezekiel 26, verses 7 to 14. So those are rather long passages, so I didn't want to, and it's nothing, it's not really new information, but you see that other prophets were told about this man. And so let's look now at the different kingdoms. Let's look again at our statue. So he is the head of gold. Now, what did he do in chapter 3? We'll see it next time. He made a whole statue of one of his gods of gold. He liked the gold idea, but he made a whole statue later. He is the absolute monarch, and we're going to see it again that when his son or grandson comes into power, in Daniel 5, it's repeated. The second empire is Medo-Persia, and so Babylon is 636 to 539 BC, and Medo-Persia is 539 to 330 BC. And as I said, it's not a king; it's a kingdom and an empire, and so it's inferior in that sense. And it now Babylon, remember, had been around a while. Think of Genesis, okay? The Tower of Babel. It's been around a long time since Genesis 10 and 11. Um, and now we've got two peoples, Medes and the Persians, so that didn't have that unity of Babylon, and they never really joined into one group. And they had different religions and a different kind of government, like I said earlier, that, the ruler was not the chief, was not over his own laws. Now, and then finally we get to Greece, 330 to 63 BC. So I will now describe Greece. It is a third kingdom. It's of brass, and it starts with the belly and it ends in the upper part of the legs at the thighs. And you noticed I didn't label it. The next one, the one of iron, and that third empire has two sides, if you will, east and west. You can look at it from two different ways, Dr. Fruchtenbaum says. The empire that followed Medo-Persia was founded by Alexander the Great. He started it, he ended it, but that kingdom did have east and west parts because six of his generals fought for control after Alexander the Great did not live a long life, and there was a group, and I had to look up how to say it. The Diadachi, I think, is how you say it, divided that empire into four blocks. The Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, Seleucids in the east, and the kingdom of Pergamum in Asia Minor and Macedon. And, the Greek or Hellenistic period, there's just always warfare going on between the Diadachi and their successors. And so eventually that empire just weakened and rival forces took over. So are we talking about Greece and Macedonia? Possibly, those two legs at the top, the thighs. Is it Syria and Egypt? Yes, Syria east, Egypt west. Um, Both of those have a direct bearing on Israel, both Syria and Egypt. But Greece is going to have rule over all the earth. And just like Nebuchadnezzar, they could have taken over the planet, but they didn't do it, just like Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the fourth empire is where it gets tricky. And so let's look at our statue again. Imperialism happens in five stages. Some people just call it Rome. It is not just Rome. Imperialism has five stages, and only three of them are described in Daniel 2. We're going to have to wait till Daniel 7 to see more. Of course, if you read in your Footsteps book, that's the best way. That's why I wrote to you about those pages. So it starts united. Rome is united. We see that in verse 40. And that fourth kingdom of imperialism is going to be strong as iron. It breaks the others in pieces. It subdues and crushes all the others. It's not done physically with the statue, but that is the way it worked. And the Roman Empire was 63 BC, and it went till you can count the end of Rome either at 285 AD or 364 AD. I'm not going to go into it. But the point is, Daniel is prophesying this 600 years before it happened. So show that to your unbelieving friends or those who say, that's why they think Daniel was written later, but oh no. So there's the united stage, which goes to a two-division stage in verse 41, a divided kingdom. And that when we get to Daniel 7, we're going to see that right now, that fourth kingdom, it's going on right now. It started at either 285 or 364 AD, and it goes until now. And it still has the strength of iron. Now then he jumps down to the 10 division stage, in verses 42 and 43, and that's future for us. It hasn't happened yet. And it's also future in our study because it's not till chapter 7. And it's represented by those 10 toes, which you can see look kind of variegated. Iron and clay don't mix. It makes for a weak foundation, and it's not very cohesive. They just don't stick together. And it says they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. And there's so many different interpretations of that. I didn't want to touch on it in this kind of study, but we see that they just don't mix. And so the authority, who has the authority here in this 10 division stage? It's a republic, and a republic means there are many different groups. And the United States, for instance, is a republic, and you can see different states claiming different rights even today. And in the end, these different groups are going to demand their rights. So let's rewind. First, we have Babylon, autocrat. I had to look up some of these terms. This one I knew is a king. One guy rules everything. Medo-Persia is an oligarchy, which means a small group of people rule. And then with Hellenistic rule, there is the right of conquest. You win territory, you get to rule it. And these kingdoms are going to try to be unified, but all of them will fail. And the one world government yet to come, that's going to be formed on the basis of republicanism, which means self-governance, we govern ourselves, it will collapse into 10 kingdoms. And that, again, stay tuned to Daniel 7, verses 23 and 24, because unity is impossible. And this kingdom is vulnerable because it's trying to put things together that don't come together, like clay and iron. The American theologian Merrill Unger, who died in 1980, made a statement about the timing of this event, and we put it on a slide for you. The Iron Kingdom, with its feet of iron and clay, will exist after the church period. Because the church, we could go home tonight. I sure hope so. Or tomorrow morning if you're in Australia. When God will resume his dealing with the nation of Israel, because the Bible is about God's dealing with the nation of Israel. There's a pause going on right now during the times of the Gentiles, but after the church is gone, it'll still be the times of the Gentiles, but he will continue dealing more directly with Israel in the tribulation. He says, how futile for conservative scholars to ignore that fact, and to seek to find literal fulfillment of those prophecies in the past, in history, or in the church today. But those predictions refer to events yet future, and they have no application whatsoever to the church. So, you can watch the video when the editing is finished and get that quote if you'd like later. But the kingdom of God is talked about in verses 44 and 45. There's a fifth kingdom, and that it's not illustrated by that statue. It's not in that statue. And it's talking about in the days of those kings. Which kings? Remember the 10 toes? Okay. Those kings. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, which, not saying the millennium goes on more than 1,000 years, but it talks about the eternal sense of Christ's dominion. Jesus' dominion is today also, but and that sovereignty of the kingdom is not going to be left to a Gentile nation or people. It will destroy the Gentile empires, that stone that is created without hands. It will stand forever. And those of you who know a little bit of Hebrew might know the word olam. Well, this is not written in Hebrew, right? It's in Aramaic. So it's alam, A-L-A-M, but it's that idea. It means for a time. And the stone, let's look at that stone. You maybe have studied many other books of the Bible and you have seen the stone before. I just put up 4 examples we'll see on a slide about what the stone is. So first of all, in Psalm 118, verse 22, we see, obviously Jesus is the stone, okay? So 118, verse 22, the stone which the builders rejected, I should have put that first word, stone, in yellow, which the builders rejected, has become the chief cornerstone. That's what Jewish people say at the Passover every year, but they still don't realize who he is. Isaiah 8:14, we see what Jesus is to believers and unbelievers. Then he shall become a sanctuary. That's to believers. But to both the houses of Israel, a stone to strike and a rock to stumble over. So he becomes a stumbling stone to unbelievers and a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Isaiah 28, verse 16 says, Behold, I am laying in Zion a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation, firmly placed. This is Hebraic poetry that's repeating the idea. He who believes in it will not be disturbed. And if you didn't get it, look at 1 Corinthians 10:4. The rock was Christ. Okay? Clear as day. And this stone is going to bring the times of the Gentiles to an end when he comes back. There will never again be Gentile rule in Jerusalem. Now, when we come to the term mountain, we're talking about the kingdom of God. So let's look at at a comparison, if you will. There's a contrast between Gentile empires, which are human, and God's kingdom, which is divine. Gentile empires do not last. The duration is different. They are temporary, and God's kingdom is eternal. And the last point of comparison is their power, because the Gentile empires are overcome by the succeeding empires, but God's kingdom is unconquerable. And God will establish this fifth kingdom, his own kingdom, after those four empires have run their course. And so, an important point, there are so many amillennial churches, churches who believe that we are in the millennial kingdom right now. And there are a lot of points to be made about that. But if we look at this statue and what is illustrated, I want to put this on a slide. I want you to think about it, take notes if you'd like. But what can we say to people who say that fifth kingdom is right now? So we put the slide up. We see that Jesus did not smash any kingdoms like that stone is going to do. He was crucified. He was executed. Secondly, there was no theocracy set up at his first coming, not at all. And the church didn't rapidly conquer the whole world. Come on. And the church is not conquering Gentile kingdoms, right? So, contextually and any other way, it's impossible to say that the church is the kingdom of God in chapter 2 of Daniel. You're imposing, that's eisegesis, that's imposing your thinking, your theology on the text. And so the conclusion we come to in verse 45b, the second half of that verse, is the great God has made known to the king what's going to happen in the future. And this dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. And so let's look really briefly at the rewards that Daniel gets. Um, Verse 46, the king falls on his face before Daniel. Wow. Gentile power is humbled before Israel. And it says he worshiped Daniel. We'll look at that. In Babylonian thought, he worshiped the God who Daniel represents, and he offered sacrifices. Verse 46, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. Wow. He went from being a prisoner to, he's bowing down before him. Incredible. Now, did Nebuchadnezzar think of Daniel as a god? Nah. It's more likely that the king was acting according to Babylonian thought, and the Babylonian perspective is the God that Daniel represents. It's very surprising, but you can see Daniel as a type of the Messiah. He was persecuted. Remember, he was a prisoner. He was despised and rejected as a prisoner, but at the end, he will be recognized for who he is. Now, did Nebuchadnezzar really get it at that point? Did he become a believer? Nah, I don't think so. Because if he had really got the whole idea of the dream, he would have said, "Uh-oh, who's coming after me?" Yeah, it talked about his fall and that of the kingdom, but he's just so impressed that Daniel did this, and he's just beside himself. So, as the head of gold, he ruled that first kingdom, and then, and he's falling on his face before a Jew, but the day will come when all Gentile power will be humbled before Israel. And so Nebuchadnezzar honors the God of Daniel. We have come pretty much to the end of our time. I just want to share something briefly with you, maybe just a little nugget for you to take home, and we'll finish with with the more of the rewards. Um, well, no, I want to talk about one other thing. Whenever the stone is used symbolically, it's always the second person of the Trinity, God the Son, the Lord Yeshua, the Messiah. And when mountain is used, it refers to a king, a kingdom, or a throne. God, of course, will set up his own kingdom instantaneously, miraculously, cataclysmically after that 10 division stage. And of course, the Messiah is the stone cut without hands. So, let's let's see. This is a but because Nebuchadnezzar sets up a whole statue that he wants everybody to worship, he didn't get who God was. He just added Yahweh to, his pantheon of gods, even though he said Daniel's God is the God of gods, Lord of kings, he's a revealer of secret and all these things. He's not a believer, all right? Just like people today who might say, yeah, I listen to, I forgot his name. He is a big guy with a big podcast anyway, and he says, it's kind of cool to go to church and be with people who want to improve themselves. Rogan, yeah. Anyway, no, 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 he doesn't get it. But what did Daniel get? Verse 48, a high position, many gifts. Daniel became rich. He became ruler over the province where the Jewish people were. Province of Babylon was the biggest one, and he could have watched over his brethren and made him chief governor, superior astrologer. He must have thought Daniel was an astrologer. And remember, Matthew 2, they're going to refer back to Daniel in Aramaic and go, oh, there's a star. We should go follow that because Daniel told us about this. So pretty cool. And his friends also get positions of authority. It's going to cause him trouble later. Um, but only Daniel was in the gate of the king, it said. He had direct access. So we'll end by saying the times of the Gentiles will play themselves out throughout the history of these Gentile empires. And after the time of the Gentiles, there will be the second coming, and all those empires will end, and Jesus will set up his kingdom. So let's stop there for today, and I will look forward to being with you in a couple of weeks. And if you have questions, type them up in the Q&A. But for now, I'll say shalom, shalom. Bye.